In this Blender beginner tutorial, I will show you how to do 3D modeling for beginners. So in this video, I'm going to be covering things like the basics of adding objects, how to use edit mode, the basics of 3D modeling, and then I'll be going over a bunch of common different 3D modeling tools and their shortcut keys. So things like insetting, extruding, adding bevels, loop cuts, and even adding some basic modifiers. And at the very end of the video, I'll give you some video recommendations that you can watch for some of my other tutorials, which are great beginner exercises to get better at 3D modeling. Now, if you're a complete beginner to Blender and you've never used Blender before, then I do have a few tutorial recommendations. So I have a Blender quick start guide for absolute beginners, and so that video is for people who have never opened Blender before and they need to know how to do basic things like orbiting around, basic navigation, selecting objects, and things like that. So definitely check that out, link is in the description. And if you'd like a complete introduction to all the basic fundamentals of Blender, then definitely check out my Blender for Complete Beginner tutorial series, where I teach you all the basics of Blender while creating this snowman character. So in this video, it is recommended to be somewhat familiar with the very basic things like, for example, navigating around your scene, zooming in and out, and selecting objects. So if you've never opened up Blender before, then I definitely recommend checking out that Blender quick start guide video. But really quick, I am just going to cover a few things which you should know. So obviously you can left click to select objects, and then you can hold down the shift key and select objects, and that's going to select multiple objects. You can also use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out, and then you can also click down with your middle mouse button and move around, and that's going to orbit. Then you can also hold down the shift key and click with your middle mouse wheel, and that's going to pan back and forth. And then if you have an object selected, three very basic tools are G to grab the object, R to rotate the object, and S to scale the object. And my screencast keys are going to be right down here in the corner of the video. If you hit the T key to open up the side panel, you can also use the Move tool, which is G, so the Move tool. You can also use the Rotate tool to rotate objects, and you can also use the Scale tool to scale objects. And also, if I click here and drag this out to make it bigger, you can see we have Move, Rotate, and Scale. You can also delete objects by either pressing the X key or by just pressing the Delete key. And then if you want to select everything, you press the A key and that will select everything. Then if you want to deselect everything, you double tap the A key. And one more very basic common shortcut key is Shift D. So Shift D is going to duplicate your selection. Now, if you're kind of overwhelmed by all these different things and you can't remember all the shortcut keys, don't worry, I still will be going very slowly in this tutorial because this is a pretty beginner friendly tutorial. So what I'm going to do is hit A to select everything, and then I'll just hit the delete key to delete everything. So when you're starting 3D modeling, you want to add what's called a primitive object, and so you want to add the type of object which is closest to the shape of the thing that you want to model. Now to add an object, you can click here on the Add button, or you can also use the shortcut key by pressing Shift A. So I always press Shift A because it's a lot quicker, but if that's a little bit hard for you to remember, if you're still a beginner, it might be hard to remember all the shortcut keys at once, you can just click here on the Add menu. Now when you're doing 3D modeling, most of the time you're going to want to use the mesh objects. So when you're doing 3D modeling, you're not going to want to use a light or a camera. These are other types of objects. When you're 3D modeling a mesh, you want to use the mesh objects. So you can see if I go to mesh, there are the basic default primitive objects. So there's a torus, that's like a donut shape. There's a cone, there's cylinder. There's also two types of circles or spheres or balls. So there's the UV sphere and the icosphere. There's also a circle, which is sort of like a cylinder, but it's not like 3D. And then there's also a plane, which is just like a flat surface. And then there's also the cube. So let's start just by adding a new cube. And I'm going to click here to use the Select Box tool on the T side panel. If you want to, you can use the Move, Rotate, and Scale. If you're a beginner, it might be easier to use these, but I'm just going to change this back to the Select Box because I'm going to use the shortcut keys of G, R, and S. Now real quick, I'm just going to delete this cube, so I'll hit the X button and then click on Delete, and then I'll click on Add, Mesh, and I'm going to add a new cube. Now right after you add any of the default primitive objects in Blender, you can see right next to me here there is this Add Cube option, and I'm going to click on this to open it up. So there are some different settings that you can change to edit the default primitive object using this setting here. So there's the size, you can drag the size up and down, and you can also change like the location and rotation. Now for a cube, this isn't very useful because if I just click to close this, I could also just scale it by hitting S or rotate it. But what I'm going to do is hit the X key and I'm going to delete the cube and I'm going to add a different object. So let's click on add. I'm going to go here to mesh, and this time I'm going to add a cylinder. So when I open up the add cylinder settings here, which are right next to me, you can see there are some more settings. So every type of default primitive object is going to have different settings. And so this tool is very useful because, for example, let's say you didn't want there to be as much geometry and you want to be what's called lower poly. So there's not as much geometry to the mesh. Well, to do that, I can drag the vertices, and I'll be explaining things like vertices and those different types of names later in the video, but you can see I can drag the vertices here, and so that's sort of like the resolution of the cylinder. So if I turn it up really high, that's actually like way too high for most things that you'd want a 3D model. So the default is 32. If I hover my mouse over that value and then hit the backspace, it's going to reset it to the default value. I'll just leave it at the default value, but then there's also like the radius, so it can be thicker, and the depth, which is going to make it taller or shorter. Now, if I do something to this object, like let's say move it, so I'll hit G to grab, and then just like stick it over here. Now you can see those settings are gone, and I can't actually change those settings. So you only want to do this, you only want to change those settings right at the very beginning after you add that object, because once you move it or do something to it, I can't actually edit that resolution. So that is just something important to remember. So I'm just going to close this move setting, just make that smaller. Now, something that's important to know about adding objects is that your objects are always going to be added where this little icon is here. And this is called the 3D cursor. Now, if you hold down the Shift key and then right click, that is going to move the 3D cursor. So Shift right click. Now, if you want the 3D cursor to be in the very center here, what you can do is press Shift C. So Shift C is going to make the 3D cursor in the very center. So if I just select the object, move it over, let's just Shift and right click right there. Then if I press Shift C, it'll go into the very center, but it's also going to zoom into whatever the objects are in your scene. Now, another way to do this is you can just press Shift S, and when you press Shift S, that is going to bring up what's called a pie menu. So I'm going to hold down the Shift S, and then I can click on Cursor to World Origin, or actually don't click on it, just drag your mouse down, and then you can let go of Shift S. So now the cursor is in the very center, but I usually just like pressing Shift C because it's easier to remember and faster. So now that the cursor is in the center there, if I add another object by going add, and I'll go to mesh and add a plane, the plane is right there. But if I like move the cursor and then go add mesh and let's add like an icosphere, now the icosphere is right over there. So maybe I want to add an object right there, Shift right click, and now I can go to the add menu with Shift A or the add menu, and I can just add like a UV sphere, and you can see the UV sphere is right there where the 3D cursor is. So that's something that's very, very useful. Now, something that you also might be wondering about is how to kind of fix the weird sharp shading. So if I just select this object, you can see that I was talking about the resolution earlier, and you can see these little like faces here. So these flat faces. But let's say I want to make this look nice and smooth. Well, there are some different shading types in Blender to shade your objects. So if you right click, that is going to bring up the object context menu. So right click, and you can see there are some different options. And so these options are for whatever object you have selected. And you can see there's shade smooth, shade flat, and shade auto smooth. So the default one is shade flat. So if I click on this, you can see nothing is going to change because it's all shaded flat. Well, if I just right click and choose shade smooth, you can see now the mesh looks really smooth. So kind of around the cylinder looks pretty nice, but you can see right up here, something looks a bit weird. It almost looks like it's very like rounded, even though we know that it's not rounded because it's sharp on the end. So this is where auto smooth can be really useful. So if you right click and choose shade auto smooth, now you can see it's going to smooth out this round part right here, but it's going to keep the top kind of flat, or it's going to really keep the edge kind of flat. And so that actually looks really nice. The object looks a lot nicer now. I could also do the same thing for this. So I will select this object and then right click, and I could just do shade smooth or shade auto smooth. But in this case, I'm going to do shade smooth because I want the entire thing to be smooth. And now we have that round sphere. But for an object like a plane, if I select the plane, I could choose shade flat. That's the default. I could also do shade smooth, but you can see it doesn't really look any different. And that's because the plane is just totally flat, so it doesn't have any roundness to it. And I can also shade auto smooth, and again, it looks totally the same. So it doesn't really look any different. For a plane, I would just keep it shaded flat. Now you might be wondering how Blender actually knows to round this out and smooth it out, but then keep this flat. Well, there is actually an angle that it actually chooses. So if you click on this little button right here, this is a wrench icon, and this is the modifiers panel. And we're going to be talking about modifiers later in the video, but modifiers are basically a way to modify your object using these little boxes here. So you'll click on add modifier, and you're going to add these little boxes here, which are called modifiers. And when you add them, they're basically going to affect the object. So they're a really great modeling tool. Now, when I chose the auto smooth by just clicking shade auto smooth, it actually added a modifier called smooth by angle. And so basically what it's doing is anything which has a small angle, it's going to shade smooth, but then anything with a sharp angle, it's going to shade flat. So this angle right here, this is a 90-degree angle. So if I took this angle value and dragged it up and made it really big, let's drag it higher than 90. So if I make it higher than 90, you can see now it's very smooth because this angle is bigger than 90, and since this is only 90, now it shaded everything smooth. If I drag this down less than 90, now it's going to shade everything else smooth, but because this has a 90-degree angle, it's going to shade it flat. So that is just something useful to know if you're wondering, like, if you shade something smooth, why sometimes it looks smooth and sometimes it looks flat. It just depends on the angle here. But in this case, right now, I'm just going to click on this exit button just to get rid of the shade auto smooth. Let's actually right click, and I'm going to just shade this flat again. And I can select this one here and just shade flat. So just by moving objects around and adding different primitive objects, I could do very basic 3D modeling. But what if I want to do more complex modeling? Well, you can't really do that in object mode. You need to use a different mode, which is called edit mode. So right up here on the top of Blender in the 3D view, there is object mode. So if I click on this, you can see there's some different modes, and there's different things you can do in Blender, like sculpting. If you've heard about sculpting in Blender, you can basically do digital sculpting and like sculpt characters and things. There's also some other modes here, but the one that we're going to use, and the main most common one that everyone mostly uses, is edit mode. So let's click on edit mode, and this is the next common mode after object mode. So now we're in edit mode, so we can actually edit the physical shape of the object. Now what you'll also notice is that there's a bunch of new tools here. Now I am going to be clicking on these different tools in the video and showing you how to use the different tools, but then I'm also going to show you how to use the shortcut keys, because it's so much faster to remember the shortcut keys, and once you get better at Blender, you're really going to want to know the shortcut keys. But if you're just starting out with Blender, it might be a little bit overwhelming to try to remember everything. So that's why you can also use this tools panel right here to see all of the main tools for modeling. But I'm just going to scroll up here and just choose the select box. Now I was mentioning shortcut keys, and there is actually a shortcut key to go between object mode and edit mode because it's so common. So you press the tab key. So tab will go into edit mode and object mode. So if you've watched Blender tutorials before, people commonly say, let's tab into edit mode as if it's like a verb. So let's tab into object mode or tab into edit mode. And so I say that a lot in my tutorials as well. Now, when you're in edit mode, all the basic tools, which you already know, are pretty similar. So you can hit R to rotate, G to grab, and S to scale. And you can also press A to select everything, and then double tap A to deselect everything. So what I'm going to do for an example is just hit A to select everything, and then I'm going to hit G to grab, and I'm going to move all of the mesh right over here. Now what I can do is either click on edit mode and go back to object mode, or I can press the tab key. Now when you do that, you can see that this little dot here, which was normally in the center of all the objects. So if I select all the objects, you can see there's this little like dot here in the center of them. Well, this one is still in the very same position, even though I moved the object over. So if I hit G to grab, or R to rotate, or S to scale, you can see it's scaling from that little point there. So even though the actual mesh is over here, it's being moved or transformed by this center point. And so this is what's called the object origin. And every single object in Blender has an object origin, and it's basically the center position of the object. Now, because we went into edit mode, let's do this again. So object mode, edit mode, or you can press the tab key. When you're in edit mode, you're not actually moving the object's location. You are editing the mesh, which is built up to create the object, but you're not actually moving the object. So in object mode, you can move the object around, but then in edit mode, you can move the mesh which is inside the object. So when you're like building a scene, maybe you have like a city scene and you have cars and you have like a ground object and you have people and things, you want to move those objects around in object mode. But then if you want to edit a specific object, then you want to go into edit mode and just edit the object. Because if I like try to move this over here, maybe I'm like building a city or something, so I add like a cube here for a house. Well, now if I tried to move this or rotate it or scale it, it's acting really funky because the origin point is way over here. So it's best to move the objects in object mode, but edit the objects in edit mode. Now sometimes you might want to just move the object's origin back to the center of the mesh without actually moving the mesh, because maybe I want this mesh right here, I've put it at a specific spot. Well, there are ways to take the origin and move it back to the center of the mesh. So to do this, you want to click on Object, and then you want to click on Set Origin, and there's a bunch of different options here. Probably the main one that you're going to use is the Origin to Geometry. So the origin is that little orange dot, and the geometry is the actual mesh. So Origin to Geometry, and now you can see that it's taken that dot there and it's stuck the object origin here in the center. So now if I rotate this or scale it or move it, it's moving correctly. So that's super common. It's very common to just go Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry. But what I'm going to do is go back into edit mode and move this over. And by the way, you also can't do this in edit mode. So you can see the option isn't there in edit mode. The option is only there in object mode. So in object mode, there's another option that I want to show you, and that is if you click on Object, Set Origin, you can do the opposite effect. So you can do geometry to origin instead. So if I click on this, that's actually going to move the mesh over to the center of where the origin is. So again, these are very useful and you're going to use them a lot. Now another really common one is the origin to 3D cursor. So let's say I just place the 3D cursor by shift right clicking. Maybe I want the origin point to be on the very bottom there. Well, I can shift right click to put the 3D cursor there, and then if I go Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D cursor, now you can see the origin is right there where that cursor was. So I can rotate this and scale it and move it from the bottom of the cube. Now, as well as editing a single object by hitting the Tab key, you can actually edit multiple mesh objects at once. So if I hold down the Shift key and select another object, you can see now I have these two objects both selected at once. Well, you can just hit Tab or click on Object Mode and go to Edit Mode, and you can see we can actually edit both objects at once. So they both have separate origin points. There's an origin point there and an origin point there. So it kind of appears as though it's the same object, but if I go back to Object Mode by hitting the Tab key, you can see they still are different objects. Now, just so that you're not confused, I wanted to mention that with the shortcut keys here, I'm going to be switching back to right-click select, and I use right-click select because that's how I learned Blender, because that was the default shortcut keys back when I learned Blender. But you can totally ignore this step. What I'm going to do is click on Edit and go to the Preferences, and then over here on Blender's User Preferences on the key map, I'm just going to change this to the right-click select because that's how I'm comfortable with Blender. But for most programs, it makes sense to use left-click select, so you can totally just leave it as left-click. I'm just going to use right-click because I'm a weirdo. So just keep that in mind when you are looking here at the shortcut keys. Now, if we hit the Tab key to go into edit mode, I want to talk about what a mesh is actually made out of. So a mesh is made out of three things. It's made out of vertices, it's made out of edges, and it's made out of faces. Now, a vertex is a single vertex. So a vertex is a single point there. You can see if I click there to select that, we've now selected a single vertex. But then if you select multiple vertices, that's called vertices. So all mesh objects are made out of vertices. But then to create an edge, which is a line, you need two vertices. So you can't have an edge without there first being vertices. And then to create a face, which is actually the visible part of the mesh, you need at least two edges to create a face. So let's actually construct a very basic face. So what I can do is just hold down the Control key and just right click. And that is going to add a single vertex. So it's way over here, but let's just navigate over here so that we can see it. So here is our single vertex. But then as I mentioned, you need two vertices to create an edge, which is a line. So I'm just going to add another one. So let's just double tap A to deselect everything. And then I'm going to Control right click to add another one. And now I want to add an edge in between them. And to add an edge, you can press the F key, and you can remember F for fill. So F is going to fill your selection. So now what I want to do is add another one, and I want to create a face. So we're going to create a triangle face. So what you can do is just select the other vertex, and then if you just Control right click right here, so Control right click, you can see because I had that one selected, it basically extruded another edge out. So we now have three vertices and we have two edges. Well, if I hold down the Shift key and select all of them, now what I want to do is add a face right here. And to add a face, you can press the F button again. So the F button is going to fill an edge or fill a face. Now, if you're not using a face, And if I go from edit mode back to object mode, this isn't actually going to show up in a 3D render because faces are the only actual mesh which you'll be able to see in a render. But if I go into edit mode and then press the F key, now this will actually show up in a render because it has visible faces. Now, so far at this point, we've only been selecting vertices, but what if you actually want to select an entire face without having to hold down the shift key and select all the vertices around it? Well, right up here in the corner of Blender, if you're in edit mode, you can see right up here, there is the vertex select, there's edge select, and there's face select. So I can click on edge select, and now you can see I can just select the edges. Or I can click on face select, and this way I can only select faces. So if I go back to object mode, let's select this icosphere here, and we're going to go into edit mode. Now you can see I can just select the faces, or I could just go to the vertex select and select the vertices. Now you can actually hold down the shift key and click on all three of them. In this way you can actually select the vertices, you can select the edges, and you can select the faces. So if I just click on like the center point of the edge, or like the center of the face, that's going to select each one. So you really will use all three of them. So it is just going to depend on what you're working on. Now there is a shortcut key for this because it is so common. So if you press the 1, 2, or 3 on the top of your keyboard, not the number pad 1, 2, 3, but the 1, 2, 3 on the top of your keyboard, that is going to switch between vertex select, edge select, or face select. So 1 is vertex, 2 is edge, and 3 is face. So if you just have a face selected, then if you press G to grab, R to rotate, or S to scale, it's only going to move your current selection. So this is where we can really get into more complicated 3D modeling, and we can just edit certain parts of the mesh. So let's go back to object mode by hitting tab. We're going to select the cube and hit tab, and then let's click here or press the 3 on the top of your keyboard to go to the face select. Now I can select the top face, and if I wanted to make this look like maybe a city building, I'll hit G and just drag it up. Now, if you've watched my Blender Quick Start guide, or if you've gotten past the very beginner stages, then you'll know about the axes, and the axes are right here on this little gizmo. So there's the x-axis, there's the y-axis, and the z-axis. So if you press X, that is going to constrain your movement to the x-axis. If you press Z, that's going to constrain your movement to the z-axis, which is up and down, and then Y, which is going to be going back and forth. So let me hit escape to undo that. So if I want to make this like a tall city building, like a skyscraper, I could hit G to grab, but then instead of just pulling it up, it would kind of be offset and kind of weird. I can press Z, which is going to constrain it to just the z-axis. And then I can just click to place that right there. And if you're ever confused about which axis to move it on, if you move around here, you can see there's this little gizmo, which will kind of show you the direction, but also in the 3D view, there is this 3D grid. So the y-axis is back and forth and it's green. The x-axis is side to side. Of course, it is going to depend on the location, like which way you're looking at it. But if you're looking on front view, the x-axis is side to side. And then the z-axis isn't actually here in the 3D view. You can actually show it by clicking right here on the overlays, and then you can go here to the axes and you can choose Z. I'm just going to turn that on. So now you can see the Z axis is up and down. Now all three types of transformations will respond to the X, Y, and Z axis. So you could also hit R to rotate, and then you could hit Z or X or Y. You could also hit S to use the scaling feature, and then you could choose Z, X, or Y. Now, if you are using the select box, if you just click and drag, that's going to select what's in the box. If you go into edit mode by hitting the tab key and you click and drag, it's also going to do the same thing. You can also press the B key, and the B key is going to add the box here, and then you can click and drag and select whatever you want to select. Now what I'm going to do is go back to object mode, and let's just zoom up here so we have a bit more space, and I'm going to click on add. Let's go to mesh, and I'm going to add a more detailed object, which is a UV sphere. And then I will hit G, and I will hit Z, and just bring the sphere up here, and then let's kind of zoom into it. And also another really important thing, which you may have already learned if you watch some sort of quick start guide or beginner tutorial, is if you press the period key on the numpad, that's going to zoom you into your selection. So whatever you have selected, you can press period to zoom into it. So that is very useful to know. And the same exact thing works in edit mode. So if I select a face and then press the period on the numpad, that is going to zoom me into the selection. So what I'm going to do is just click and drag to box select the very top here, the very top of the sphere. Now another useful tool for selecting is you can press the Control plus button. So Control plus, and what that's going to do is it's going to select all the faces which are nearby it. Or if you have like edge select or vertex select turned on and hit Control plus, Control plus, Control plus, that is going to select all of the mesh which is nearby it. And you can also press Control minus, and that's going to deselect the mesh which is nearby it. So that can definitely be very useful if you maybe select the top of a mesh, but you want to just select a little bit more. This Control minus and Control plus will definitely be very useful. Now, just like in object mode, you can press the X key or you can press the delete key. Well, in edit mode, you can also press the delete key or you can press the X key, but it's going to bring up a menu and it's a little bit more complex because when you're in edit mode, you can choose to delete just the vertices, just the edges, just the faces, and there's a few other options. So if I just zoom in here, take a look at the sphere. If I hit X and delete the faces, you can see it deleted only the faces, but it actually kept this little ring of vertices. I'm going to press Control Z to undo that. Let's hit the X key again. Well, then I can also choose to just delete the edges. So I'll delete the edges, and now you can see that it's deleted the edges which are like connecting these vertices, but we still have all these pokey vertices which are kind of coming up. Let's hit Control Z to undo that. So Control Z, let's hit X to delete again, but this time I'm going to choose to delete vertices. So this time it actually deleted an extra face here. So if I press Control Z to undo that, you can see this ring of faces actually isn't selected. But if I hit X and delete vertices, it's going to delete that row of faces there, and that's because there are vertices here which make up the face. But if you don't want to delete that, if you don't want to delete this row here, you can just choose to delete the faces. And there are also a few other settings. We may go into a few of these later in the video, but the main ones which you'll use are vertices, edges, and faces. You can also choose to delete only faces. I'll show you this one. This is kind of a cool one. So if I delete only faces, you can see now we kind of have like a wireframe mesh because it's going to delete the faces, but it won't delete the edges and vertices which make up the face. So sometimes that can definitely be useful for creating kind of like a wireframe shaped object. Now, if you look up here on the add menu, you can see that in edit mode, there is also an add menu. However, in edit mode, we're limited to only adding the mesh objects. Whereas in object mode, if I go to object mode, we can add lots of different objects, but you can't add like a camera or a light in the mesh edit mode because in edit mode, we can only add meshes. And you can also use the shortcut key, which is Shift A. So for example, I could add this monkey head here, and the monkey's name is Suzanne, and Suzanne is the mascot of Blender. So I can add a Suzanne head. Let's zoom out here and I'll hit G and then Z and move this up here. Let's navigate over and then I can press the period to zoom into it. And let's just go back to object mode. So you can see there is the Blender monkey Suzanne head. But now you can see if I try to move this around in object mode, even though these are separate meshes, they're not connecting, they're actually the same object because they were added in edit mode. So early in the video, I was talking about how you can construct your own mesh. Well, what I'm going to do is do kind of a cool modeling exercise where we're going to build our own cube by scratch. So let's go back to object mode. We're going to select everything with A, and we're going to hit G and just move everything over. So now what I want to do is press Shift C. So Shift C is going to center the 3D cursor. And let's go to the add menu by hitting Shift A or go to the add menu. And I am just going to add like a plane. Let's press period to zoom into the plane. And we can go from object mode to edit mode or press tab. Then I'm going to press the X button and we're going to delete the vertices. So everything is gone. So now what I'm going to do is Control right click. So Control right click and it's going to add a vertex there. Now what I want to do is view this from the top view and we're going to construct a plane and then we're going to bring the plane up to make a cube. But what I want to do is see this from the exact top view. I don't really want to be able to see the perspective view. I want to be able to see it from flat top view. So this is where you can use the number pad. So you can press 1 on the number pad, which is going to go to the front view. You can press 3 on the number pad, which is going to go to side view, and you can press 7 on the number pad, which is going to go to top view. And if you don't have a number pad for Blender, then what you can do instead is just click on the little gizmo here. So you can click on like -Y here, that'll go to the front view, and then you can go to like side view and top view. So you can click on those gizmos. And I also have a video specifically talking about some different methods which you can use if you don't have a number pad for Blender. So you can check out that video with the link in the description if you're interested. Another thing you can do is hold down the Alt key, and then you can middle click and drag. So Alt, middle click and drag, and that's going to take you like to front view and to side view and all the views. Now you might notice that everything looks a little bit different when I'm in like this front view or side view and top view. And that is because we are in what's called orthographic perspective. Whereas if I just click with my middle mouse wheel, now you can see we're just in the regular perspective. But if I press like 1 on the numpad to go to front view, now we're in orthographic. So what orthographic is it's going to basically remove any of the perspective. So this is really helpful for more precise modeling. So I'm going to press 7 on the numpad to go to top view, or you can press on the Z button to go to top view. And now I can zoom in here and we can do really precise modeling. Now you can use the grab tool if you want to, or the move tool. What I'm going to do is hit G, and I'm going to drag this right over here, kind of to this corner of the grid. So I'll drag it over here. Now what I'm going to do is use a new tool, which is the Extrude tool. Now the Extrude tool is right here, so you can click on the Extrude tool to use it. But for this specific example, it's easier just to use the select box, and I'm going to press E. So E is going to extrude out our vertex there. Now what I can also do is click and drag with my middle mouse wheel. And so if you click and drag, that's going to constrain it to one of the axes, or you can press the Y button. And I'm going to click there. So now what I can do is I can take both of these vertices and select both of them, and I want to extrude this out again to make a plane. So I will hit E to extrude, and you can see now we're extruding out a plane. And again, you can press the X key, or you can click and hold with your middle mouse wheel to constrain it to an axis. And I'm going to drag it out just to about there. You don't need to get it exact, something like that. So now if I just click with my middle mouse wheel to move down here, you can see we've made our own plane. Then what I can do is hit A to select everything. So I'll hit E, and then you can see it's already moving up on the Z-axis. That's because it's being extruded up by the direction of the face, and that is called the face's normal. So I can just drag this up here and click here. What I'm going to do is actually hit Control Z to undo that though, and I'm going to press the 1 to go to front view. And you can see there's these little blender grids here, so I want to make this really close to a cube shape. So I'll hit E, and then I can bring this up, or you can also just hit the Z button. If it doesn't bring it up on the Z-axis on the top here, you can press Z to bring it up on the Z-axis, and then just click right there to place that. So now you can see we basically constructed our own cube. Now this is kind of silly. You wouldn't actually do this most of the time because it's very easy in object mode to press Shift A, go to mesh, and just add a cube. So it's a lot easier just to use the primitive objects, but I just wanted to show you how to model a cube by hand, just so you can be more familiar with how the mesh objects are actually created. Now real quick, before we continue with the video, I wanted to thank my Patreon supporters and my Gumroad customers for supporting the channel. And because of my Gumroad customers and Patreon supporters, I'm able to keep creating these free tutorials on YouTube. So if you enjoy this channel and you'd like to help support me to help me keep on creating these free videos, then definitely check out my Gumroad store and Patreon page with the link in the video description. So on my Patreon page, you can join a membership and you'll be supporting the channel monthly, and you'll get access to lots of Blender content, such as 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content on my Patreon page. Or if you'd like to help support the channel with a one-time purchase, then you can check out my Gumroad store, where I have all of my content, which is also on my Patreon page, but it's also on my Gumroad store as products, so you can just purchase a product if you have a specific product you're interested in. So thank you everyone so much for your support, and you really do make these videos possible. So I'm just going to hit Tab to go back to object mode, and then let's just select everything with the A key, and I'm going to press delete or X, and we're just going to delete everything. So now I'm going to start showing you how to use the basic tools which are on the side panel. So let's go to the add menu again. I'm going to go to mesh, and I'm just going to add a new cube. Now you can't actually see all the tools. That's because you need to hit tab to go into edit mode, and now you can see all the different tools. And if for some reason you don't see this, you can press the T key to open and close the side panel. So I actually usually keep it closed because I use the shortcut keys, but if you're a beginner, it can be really useful just to have all the tools here. And if you don't see the names, you can just click here to drag it out to make it bigger and smaller. There's the hidden option, there's the really small option, then there's a slightly bigger option, and then there's the option with the names. So the select box is the one that we already talked about to select things. The cursor is basically just a way to move the cursor around. And then we also talked about the move tool, the rotate tool, and the scale tool. Now the transform tool is basically going to be the move, rotate, and scale, but all at once. And then the annotate, this is basically going to be a way that you can like draw in 3D space. It's sort of like the grease pencil, but it's a little bit different. But again, you don't really need to use this. This is basically a way that like lots of tutorial creators will do things. So I see a lot of other tutorial creators using this to kind of explain things. The measure tool is also used to like measure different things, but we're not going to be using that in this video. So the first tool is add cube. Now I really don't use this that much because if I want to add a cube, I would just press Shift A and add a new cube, but this is kind of a cool way that you can build a cube. So if I move my mouse here using the add cube setting, there's a little grid here, and the grid is going to snap to a face. So if you click and drag, you can see we can drag out a plane here, but then if we let go, I can drag up, and so we're basically building out our own cube. And then you can just click to place that there. And you can see now we basically have a new cube. So I can do that again, click, drag out, then drag out, and then let go. So this could be very useful if you're modeling maybe some sci-fi kind of boxy objects, or maybe you're modeling like a city or something. I really don't use it hardly at all, but it could be useful if you want to build lots of specific shaped cubes. Now you can see that some of these options have these little like corner tabs here, and so this is telling you that it has more options. So if I click on it and then hold down, so basically click and hold, it's going to give me different options, and I can continue to hold down my mouse and I can choose between different options. So there's actually a few different primitive shapes. So I could go to add cone and then let go of my mouse button. Now I can click, drag, and it's going to do a circle, and then I can let go, drag up, and then click, and it's going to build a cone. But again, you can also just go to the add menu and add a cone. So I don't use this that often, but it might be kind of useful. And I can also click, drag, and use like the cylinder. So I can add a cylinder. I can also do the same thing for like a UV sphere. So click and then drag out. So again, I really don't use this that often, but it is kind of cool. I'm going to hit Control-Z just to undo this, just to get rid of these options. Now the next one is box carve, and I've really never used this. The first time that I actually ever used this was just yesterday when I was prepping for this tutorial and kind of writing out the script, because I basically never use it. So what you can do is just click and drag, and then when you let go, for some reason this error comes up, and I don't know why this comes up. Maybe this is because I use the Linux operating system, or maybe it's a bug in Blender, I'm really not sure, but you can see basically what it's going to do is going to draw out this box here. And if you click and drag down, you can also use like circle and polygon. I'm not going to use this though. I'm just going to hit Control-Z to undo this because I really don't find it that useful. So now we get to the really useful tools. So these tools here are the very useful tools. These are the main tools which are going to be using for 3D modeling. So I already talked about the extrude tool. So if you click on extrude, this is going to extrude and kind of make larger whatever you have selected. So I can click on the face select, and I can click on the face to select it. And so if you have the extrude tool on, there is a plus here. So if I click and drag, that is going to extrude out the mesh. So I could click on this face, extrude it out, click on this face, extrude out. And so if you're a beginner to Blender, this is actually really fun. I remember when I was first learning Blender, I learned the shortcut key, which was E. So E is the shortcut, which I mainly use. And I thought this was so fun. So I just kind of went around like this, kind of extruding things. So it's pretty cool to quickly build out a blocky mesh. So you can either use the extrude region option by just clicking and dragging the plus, or the shortcut key is the E key. So E to extrude. So it's a lot faster once you memorize the shortcut keys. Just to use E, it'll just be way faster. Now, just like the other tools, you can see there's this little tab here. So if I click and then hold down, there's a few different options you can use. So there is the extrude along normals. Let's click on this one. So this one is definitely useful. You might use this. And so the normals is the direction that the face is pointing. So the normal for this face is going up this way. The normal for this face is going up this way. So if I hold down the shift key and select both of them, then if I drag this, you can see as well as this one going up, this one's also going out. So that could definitely be useful for a lot of things. And the quick way to do this is to just right click for the object context menu, and then you can extrude. You can also press E. You can also extrude faces along normals, and you can also extrude individual faces, which I'll be showing you. So you can also click here, and another common one is the extrude individual. So for an example here, let's just select these two ones again. Well, these both are individual faces. So if I turn on the extrude individual, then if I just click and drag here, you can see it's dragging each one out, because each one is extruded out by its normal direction. So it's basically splitting it, so now we have a gap here. And again, you can also just use the object context menu and you can extrude individual faces. Now I can also click and hold and change this to the extrude to cursor. So now if I just select one of the faces, I can just left click here and you can see it's going to jump to that position. So this is a really cool way to kind of extrude this out and make kind of like a curved shape. If I go back to object mode, let's just go to the add menu and I can add a cylinder. I'll drag the cylinder over and then go into edit mode, and I can just go back to the select box and I'm just going to select this face. Let's now go back here to the extrude to cursor. So what I can do now is just click along here and you can see we're starting to make kind of like a curved pipe. Now, if I just have the select box again, you don't actually have to use this option here if you're using the select box, because of course there's basically a shortcut key for everything in Blender. So if you hold down the control key and then right click, that is also going to do the same exact thing. And if you didn't want to use this feature, if you just wanted to use the normal extrude, you would have to hit E to extrude, then R to rotate, click there, then G to grab, and then E to extrude, R to rotate, G to grab. So you could do it, but it would just take a bit longer. So this is a really cool feature. I'm just going to delete this object. So hit X and we'll click delete, and I'm going to select the main object again, and I will hit Tab to go into edit mode. So the next one is Inset face. So what this is going to do is it's going to put a face in another face. So if I just select a face here, what I can do is now click on this little kind of circle here and I can drag down. And so you can see we're putting a face in another face. So I can click there, and then I could, for example, hit E to extrude and drag it back down there. And now we have a little hole there in our cube. So a common example of where this would be really useful is if I like add a cylinder. Let's say that I want to model like a basic cup. So I could go into edit mode and I could select the top face and scale it out a bit. Then I could use the inset. Now the shortcut key, which you'll probably get used to, is the I key. So I for inset. So it should be pretty easy to remember. So I can click there and now we have a face within a face, and then I can hit E to extrude it down and then scale it down. So now you can see we have kind of like a basic cup shape. So I'm going to delete that object and I'll select the main object and go back into edit mode. Now the next one, which is super common, this is a really great one, is the bevel tool. And this can be used on faces, vertices, and edges, but it's probably most commonly used on edges. So I'm going to click here to go to the edge select, or you can press the 2 on the top of your keyboard. And I'm just going to select this edge here. So you can see there's the gizmo here if you have the gizmos turned on. So you can use the gizmo just by clicking and dragging out, and you can see it's going to bevel that edge, and then I can let go. Now after you bevel it, let me just move myself out of the way. Right behind me, or right next to me now, if I open up the bevel, there's going to be a bunch of different options here. One of the main options, which you'll probably use, which is the most useful, is the segments. So if I turn up the segments to like a 15, now you can see that bevel is nice and smooth. You can also drag this profile shape, and so that's going to kind of thicken it up or make it very round. You can also change the width of it, so after you add it, if you want to make it bigger or smaller, you can still change the width. And there's a few other settings you might use. I usually don't use this option here. What I'm going to do is hit Control Z to get rid of it. So again, the shortcut key, which you can definitely memorize because it's way faster, is Control B. So B for bevel. Now what's so useful about using the shortcut key is not only is it faster, but you can just scroll with your mouse wheel to change the cuts of the bevel. So you can make it a really sharp bevel for like hard surface objects, or like a nice round bevel for whatever you're trying to do. And then you can drag and then just click right there to place it. But then afterwards, you can of course use this option here to kind of affect it if you want to. Now I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that, and I'm going to go to the face select and I'll select this face. And if I press Control B to this face, or use the bevel option, you can see it's going to bevel all of the edges. And then I actually just realized as you're dragging this out, you can also use your scroll wheel as you're still holding down the mouse button, and you can add cuts to the bevel. I'll hit Control Z to undo that, and then you can actually add a bevel to a single vertex. So if I go to the vertex select and select this vertex here, if you try to click and drag, you can see it's not really going to work. So there is a different shortcut. So instead of Control B, you have to hit Control Shift B. So Control Shift B is actually going to add a bevel to a single vertex. So it's going to make like a triangle in this case. And then I can scroll my mouse wheel and you can see it's going to add kind of a little grid pattern there. So that is kind of a cool feature. I do occasionally find it helpful when I'm modeling. Now the next tool is Loop Cut, and Loop Cut is extremely common. You're going to use this all the time. So when I click on Loop Cut, you can see now as I hover my mouse over any object in edit mode, you can see there is a yellow line here, and it's usually in the very center. So this is telling you where you can add a loop cut. So let's just add a loop cut maybe right here. So I'll just click to add a loop cut. And you can see now there is the loop cut in the center. Now the shortcut key, if I just change this back to the select box, again I like to use the shortcut key because it's faster. The shortcut key is Control R. So press Control R and it's going to take you into that mode where you can kind of move around and you can place a loop cut. What's really great about using the shortcut key though is that you can scroll your mouse wheel. If I change this to the loop cut, I can't really scroll my mouse wheel to make more cuts in the bevel because if I try to scroll, it's going to scroll in and out. Well, if I just use the select box again, if I press Control B, that'll take us into the loop cut mode, and then I can scroll my mouse wheel so I can add lots of cuts in the bevel and basically subdivide the mesh. And then what's also really cool is that if you left click, that's going to take you into an edge slide mode. So then I can just edge slide it maybe over here, and then left click again. Now I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo that. Let's do this again. So hit Control R. So you can scroll your mouse wheel. This time I'll just do 1 and then I can left click. But then let's say I want it to be in the very center and I don't want it to be over on this side or over on this side. Well, you can hit the escape key and that'll stick it in the center, or you can just right click. And you can see now it's just dropped it right there in the center. Now another cool feature which I thought I'd mention because we're learning about 3D modeling is after you add a loop here, what you could actually do is press Control B to add a bevel to the loop. So it's going to add a bevel to the loop which we made, and now it's basically like we're adding more cuts to the loop cut there. Now make sure you click back on the select box for now. I don't want to use any of these tools. Now there is another very useful and very common feature that you need to know. And that is that if you deselect a loop, you might want to reselect it, or you might be modeling some other part of the mesh and you might want to select a loop. So let's say that we want to select this loop right here, which is going around. So you could hold down the shift key and you could like select each vertex there. So shift select each vertex like that, but that takes a lot of time. So I'm going to deselect everything. What you can do is Alt left click. So hold down the Alt key and left click, and you can see it's going to select the entire loop all the way around. Now you might be wondering whether it's vertical and horizontal. Well, if you select up here, it's going to select vertical, but if you select over here, it's going to be horizontal. So I remember when I was first learning Blender, it is a little bit fiddly, but you will kind of figure it out. Just try to select the edge, not the vertex, because that can be kind of confusing. So select an edge here, and then it's going to select that entire loop. Now let's say that I added this loop cut here, but I want to go back into that edge slide mode. So remember when you hit Control R and then click and then drag over, this is called edge slide. Well, let's say that I placed it in the wrong spot and I want to go back into edge slide mode. Well, if you just tap the G key twice, so if you hit it once, it's going to go into grab mode. But if you hit the G key again, it's going to go into edge slide mode. So I can just double tap G and then I can drag it here and I can edge slide it back and forth and just click and place it wherever I want. So that's very common. You're definitely going to use that a lot. And it's pretty easy to remember because you're moving it. So it makes sense that you would use the G key for grab, but you're just hitting it twice. Now the next tool is the knife tool, and this is very useful. So with this tool, you can physically cut out the mesh, and this is mainly used on faces. So what I can do is just like go right up here and I can click right here on the mesh, and you can see it's added a dot there on the vertex. Then I could like click here, and just kind of click around. And then I could like click back at the starting or click on an edge. And then once you're done, you can press the enter button. And it's actually going to cut through that face and it's going to add vertices to those faces. Let's go back up here to the select box tool. I need to hit the escape key. So if you're clicking around, but then you want to get out of this mode, you can hit the escape key to go out of the mode. So I'll go back to the select box and you can see now it's added cuts there in the faces. Now the shortcut key is the K button. So if you press K, that's just going to go to the knife tool. Now I'm not going to go into too much more detail on the knife tool because I actually have a dedicated video on the knife tool. So if you want to check out that video, the link is in the description and I go over many more settings about the knife tool. Now, while we're talking about the knife tool, I also want to talk about proper topology because there are different types of topology which is better for 3D modeling. So the best type of topology is to have a face with 4 vertices. So like this here, if I just duplicate this, this is the most ideal type of face. So when you're modeling, it's usually best to have 4 vertices which make up a face. Now what you can also do is you can have 3 faces. So if I like shift select these vertices, and then hit Shift D to duplicate, bring this up here, and press the F button, now you can see this is a face, but it's like a triangle face. So this can work too. Now, if you just have 2 of them, so if I just duplicate this and move it over here, you can't really fill a face here because there aren't 3, there's only 2. So you can only fill an edge, but you can't fill a face. Now, what you generally want to avoid, if you can, is using more than 4. So you want to avoid that. So if I hit Shift D to duplicate this and drag it over here, let's use the Control R to add a loop cut, and I can left click and then right click so it stays in the center. Now what I can do is go to the face select, and I can actually shift select both of these faces here, and I can press the F key, and so the F key is going to fill both of them. Now if I go back to the vertex select and click on this vertex, I can hit G to grab and move this out here, and click on this one and hit G to grab and move this out here. So you can see now this face actually has 6 vertices. Now this is okay sometimes. You sometimes can use 5 or 6 or 7. Sometimes it is okay to use more. For example, if I go to the add menu with Shift A, I can add a cylinder. And if I look here on the top of the cylinder, you can see this face here is actually made up of a ton of different vertices. So sometimes it is okay, but generally most of the time for faces, it's best to use a face with 4 vertices. Now you might be wondering why this is an issue, because it does look okay. Well, for example, let's go here to the vertex select, and if I select these vertices and kind of drag them around a bit here, you can see that kind of looks okay, but as I start to drag this out more and more, you can see it really starts to get kind of wonky. So if I drag this forward, but then drag this back, if I'm looking at it here on front view like this, it kind of looks like the face is flat, but then when I look over here, it's like really jagged and looks kind of weird, because now it kind of looks like there's 2 faces. It would actually make sense that you would want to have like a cut here, because you can see it appears as though there's 2 faces, but there's actually 1. So let's just say I have a really wonky face like this. Well, this is where the knife tool could be really useful. So I could hit the K button for the knife tool, and I could click here, and then click here, and then let's click over here, and then hit the enter button. And then I could press the K for the knife tool again, click here, and hit enter. So now you can see the faces are a lot sharper, and so I don't really know what shape this is, but you can see the topology looks a lot nicer, because like this has 4 vertices, and then this face has 4 vertices right here, and then this face has 4 vertices. So let's go back into edit mode, and we'll go down to the next tool. So the next tool is the poly build. Now the poly build tool I basically never use. I find it a little bit hard to use and a little bit weird, and again, I just use shortcuts. But with the poly build, I can just click here and drag, and so that's going to move around the single vertex. I can also hold down the control key and then left click, and you can see it's basically going to extrude things out. I could also delete some mesh, so if I hold down the shift key and then move my mouse with the shift key held down, it's going to show me different faces, and if I click on a face, it's going to delete that face. So I can like delete that face if I don't like it, delete this face. I don't really find this tool that useful. I find that just hand modeling things work pretty well, but you might find it useful if you want to kind of play around with it. Let's go to the next one, which is the spin tool. So the spin tool is very useful for making things like pipe joints. So let's just go right up here, and I'm going to use this face here. So let's just go to the face select, and then we're going to select this top face here. And let's press the 1 on the numpad to go to side view, and I'll hit G and Z, and we're just going to bring this up. So let's say that we're modeling like a pipe joint. Well, what you can do is you can extrude it and basically spin it around. Now it's going to be extruded and spinned by the 3D cursor. So basically wherever the 3D cursor is. So if you shift right click, that's going to move the 3D cursor, and you can see wherever the 3D cursor is, that is where this little tool here, so this little gizmo here, that's where the gizmo tool is going to be. So if I press 1 to go to front view, I could just shift right click kind of around here. So that way when it extrudes up, it'll extrude and then rotate around here. Now you can see up here, there is the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. In this case, I don't really want z, because if I click and drag, you can see it's spinning it and extruding it, but it's doing it in the wrong direction. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. In this case, I actually want to change it to the y-axis. So we'll hit 1 to go to front view. So I'll click on this one and I'll click and drag, and you can see we're making this little pipe joint or pipe rotation. And I can just bring it out like that. What I can also do is hold down the control key to bring it out by increments, and I'll make it 90 degrees and then let go. So now you can see we have a cool pipe joint. Then I can hit E to extrude it out. Then I could shift right click to place the 3D cursor about there, and then do the same thing. So click and drag to drag it down. And if you want to, you can hold down control to move it by increments. Now again, let me just move myself out of the way. If you open up the spin settings, and again, these settings will only appear right after you add the spin settings. So once you add the spin settings, there's more options. So there's the angle. So I could type in like 180 180, although in this case, I need to type in negative 180, so now it rotates all the way around, or I could change it back to like maybe 45, or I could change it back to 90. So 90 is pretty good for this example. Then I could also change the steps, and the steps is basically the resolution. So how many loops there's going to be. So I can just make maybe like, I don't know, 25 or something, and then I can close the spin settings. So this is a very useful tool. Now again, if you just want to use the shortcut key and you don't want to use all the different tools here, I'll just go back to the select box, which is the default. And with this face selected, I just want to put the 3D cursor right there. Let's actually go to front view, so put the 3D cursor there, and then I can press Alt-E, and then I can click on spin. And you can see it's going to do that. So it isn't quite as customizable because it like spun it all the way around, but I can now just open up the spin settings and I can change the steps, and I can also change the angle. So instead of 360, which was the default, I can just make it like negative 90. Actually, not negative 90, just 90. So out of all of these tools, I find the spin tool is probably the most useful when using the gizmos because it's very interactive and very visual. Let's now go to the next option, which is smooth. And for the smooth, I'm actually going to go back to object mode and move this object out of the way. I'm actually just going to delete it because we don't really need it anymore, and I will press Shift C to center the 3D cursor, and then I'll hit Shift A for the add menu, and I'm going to add under mesh, I'm going to add the monkey head. So let's zoom in. You can also press the period on the numpad to zoom into it. So we'll hit Tab to go back into edit mode. So the smooth tool is really useful because it's going to smooth out the sharp edges. So if I just click and drag and start to smooth this, you can see the edges of the monkey head are really smooth. Now what I'm going to do is hit Control Z to undo that. Now this is also a good time to introduce you to another tool, which is subdivide. So what you can do is just bring up the object context menu. So just right click and you can click on subdivide. So if you click on the subdivide button, basically what it's going to do is it's going to cut all the faces in half so there's more detail. And then if I click behind me or next to me on the subdivide settings, there's the cuts here. So I can turn this up more and more, and you can see inside every single face, it's going to add a cut. Now, if I hit Tab to go back to object mode, it looks kind of similar, except that you can now see those little grid bits. So now let's go back into edit mode, and I'm going to go back to the smooth tool. Well, now this object has more geometry, I can kind of smooth this out by kind of dragging along here to kind of smooth it out. And then if I go back to object mode, you can see it looks a bit smoother now. It still is a little bit weird because how it's subdivided, so it like is a little bit chunky like right here, but you can kind of get the general idea. I am going to show you a modifier on the modifiers properties, which is also used to smooth out meshes. But this is just one way which you can kind of smooth out a mesh. If I just continue to drag it, it's going to get more and more smooth. Another way to do this is to select everything and press Control V. Control V is going to bring up vertex settings, and then I can go down here and I can click on smooth vertices. Then right next to me on the smooth vertices, I can drag this smoothing value to smooth it more, and then I can also choose to repeat it, and if I repeat it, it's going to smooth it more and more. Now, something I should have mentioned earlier, I can press Control E, and you can remember Control E for edge settings, and you can press Control V for vertex settings. So that's an easy way to remember. Control E and Control V for some different settings if you need to get to them. Now, while I'm mentioning this, I also wanted to mention, if you just have some kind of shortcut key or tool, but you can't remember what it is, you can press F3, and F3 is going to search for tons of different things in Blender, basically different operations and things you can do. So for example, I could type in smooth, and there's different smooth things that I could do. I could also type in like add, and then you can add like different objects. So I could add like a monkey head. So if you don't remember something, but you know what you want to do, you can also search for it. Now, just like many of these other tools, if I hold down the smooth tool, I can also change this to randomize. So now as I pull this out, it's going to basically randomize everything, and it looks very weird. I don't use this very often. If you hold down the shift key, that's going to make your movements more sensitive, so I can make it kind of random. And then if I go back to object mode, you can see now it looks all kind of weird and random. So not very useful. I don't use this very often. So the next one is edge slide. So let's change this to edge slide. And so for this, I'm just going to delete the monkey head. I'll hit Shift A for the add menu, and I'm going to add a new cube. And then if I go into edit mode, I can press Control R to add a loop cut, and I'll left click and right click. Now the edge slide, you can see as I click and drag, it's just going to edge slide it. But we already talked about this before. The shortcut key is double tapping G, which is just way faster. Now if you click and hold down, you can also change it to vertex slide. So now I can go to the vertex select, and I can select a single vertex, and I can just edge slide this around, so I can go in this direction or this direction. But again, if you just are using the select box, you can easily just double tap G, and so double tapping G is going to activate the edge slide. And then we have another one here, which is shrink and flatten. So this is going to scale everything along the normals, so the direction that the face is pointing. So for an example, in object mode, I'm going to delete everything, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add a UV sphere. Then I'll go into edit mode, and I'm just going to select a few faces here. So using the shrink and flatten feature, you can see if I drag this out, in and out, it's going to shrink it or flatten it along the direction of the normals. You can also press Alt S. So instead of just pressing S, S is just going to scale in and out. You can press Alt S, and you can see it's going to kind of scale it along the direction of the face. So if I select a single face, Alt S, it's going to move it in and out on the direction that the face is pointing. I can also click here and drag down, and the other option is the push and pull. So I'll change it to push and pull. And so with this one, it's kind of making it bigger and smaller. If I just select a ton of the mesh here, you can say I can drag this up and down. It's kind of similar, so it's making it bigger and smaller. Now there is one very useful reason you might want to use the shrink and flatten. If I go to the add menu and add a cylinder, let's just scale the cylinder down and scale it up on the z-axis. I'm just going to select this face here, and I'll extrude it and rotate it and extrude it and rotate it. And I'm just going to make a basic pipe. So kind of like what we made before. Well, now let's say that I want to make the pipe thinner. So instead of like holding down the Alt key, selecting that loop and trying to like scale it down, and then like selecting this one and trying to scale it down, it's really hard to kind of make it thinner. Well, what I can do is select the entire thing. And to select the entire thing, I do need to introduce you to a new tool, which is the L key. So if you hover your mouse over a mesh and hit the L key, that is going to select all of the linked vertices. So if I hit L, you can see it's going to select this one. If I hit L with my mouse hovered over this, it's going to select the linked vertices. Well, if I now select all the linked vertices, so everything is selected, I can use the shrink and flatten, and you can see it's going to make it thicker or thinner, and that's because it's moving out by the direction of the normals, which is the direction that the face is pointing. Or you can also just press Alt S, so Alt S will also use the shrink and flatten. Let's go back to object mode, and I'm just going to delete everything. And the next tool is the shear tool. So if I go to the add menu, let's just add a cube here. And we'll go into edit mode, and I'm just going to select this face, and I'll hit G, and then I'll hit Y to bring it over on the Y-axis. So let's say I'm making maybe some architecture, maybe I'm making like a picture frame, or maybe I'm making like a door frame or something like that. Well, if this is like a door frame, maybe the edge of the door frame, I'd want to extrude this out and then extrude it down. So if I go to front view, or in this case, I actually need to go to side view by hitting 3 on the numpad. So to make this look like a door frame, what I'd want to do is extrude this down, but you can see there's this spot which is in the way. So what I could do is go to the edge select, I could select this edge, and I could hit G and then bring it back on the Y-axis, and I could just kind of try to find a good amount like that. Then I could go to the face select, and I could select this face, and I could hit E, and then in this case I want to hit the Z button, and then hit the Z button again, and that way it's going to bring it up and down on the Z-axis, and I can bring that down. So now you can see we basically have this slanted piece here, so it kind of looks like maybe a door frame or a picture frame. Well, this is where the shear tool can make this so much faster. Instead of having to manually edit this, I'll just hit Control Z to undo this. So I'll just change this to the shear, and I'm just going to click to select this face here. I actually need to go to the face select and then select this face. And now there are these different gizmos here. So I can just drag this one and I can shear it. So in this example, shearing it back and forth in this direction makes the most sense. So I can shear it, and then I can extrude it down on the Z-axis. So this is a very useful feature, especially for things like architecture. Another reason why this is so useful is because let's say you go to side view, and let's say you rotate this and then try to scale it and try to fix the scale, but then it's like thicker going back and forth. If I try to like scale this up, maybe to change that, then I have to go to top view and kind of scale it down to try to fix that. Then I can finally extrude it down and then extrude down the Z-axis. But you can now see that like this size back and forth here is actually the incorrect size because it actually gets thinner. So that's why the shear tool is very useful. Now let's say that I want to shear this by an exact amount so it is an exact cube shape. Well, if I just click here and drag the shear over and then let go, then again, right behind me, I need to move myself over. I should probably just stay over here because I keep using this tool. If I open up the shear here, there is an offset. So in this case, if I type in 1, that's actually a pretty good size. So then I could extrude it by hitting E, hit the Z key twice, and drag that down, and now you can see it's like a perfect square. It looks pretty square. So let's go to the very bottom one way down here, which is the rip region. So this is a useful one. You probably won't use it too often, but I do occasionally use it. So if I just go to the vertex select and select a vertex, if I click and drag on the circle here, it's going to basically rip it and open it up. Now there's a shortcut key for this, so if I just use the select box again, if I select a vertex or an edge, I can press the V key, and the V key is going to rip it. As you can see, I can kind of open this up, and now we can kind of see inside the mesh. I can also do this for an edge, so I'll go to the edge select and select this edge, and I can press the V key, and now I can kind of open this up, so you can now see inside the cube. And there we go, we finally covered all of the basic tools here, which are on the side panel. Now, another common tool with 3D modeling, which I want to talk about, is merging. So you can see I just pulled these apart, but let's say I want to merge them back together, or maybe I'm just modeling something else and I want to merge vertices or edges or faces together. So what I'm going to do is click up here to go to the vertex select because it works best with the vertex select. And let's say that I want to join this vertex and this vertex together to kind of close this gap here. Well, if I select this vertex and then hold down Shift and select this vertex, I can press M. So when I press M with these two vertices selected, that's going to bring up the merge setting. So there's at center. So if I choose at center, it's going to move both of them. Let's hit Control Z to undo that. Let's hit M again. We can also choose at cursor, which will bring it over to the 3D cursor. That might be useful sometimes. I can also press M, and I can also go down here to at first and choose at first. So it's going to take the last one and bring it down here. That is because I selected this one first and then Shift selected this one last. Now, one which you'll probably mostly commonly use, if I press M again, I can choose at last. So this way, I select this one first, Shift select this one, M, and then at last. So it's going to snap it over here and it's going to merge them together. So now there's just one vertex there. So for practice, I can just do it again. So I can select this one, then Shift select this one last. I can hit M and choose at last. Now let's say that I just selected this, and let's just say that I drag it over here and drag it really close. So sometimes when you're modeling, it is common to sometimes have an issue where you have overlapping vertices or overlapping edges or overlapping faces. So basically mesh, which is kind of overlapping and it's really close. So if you just kind of look out here, it kind of just looks like it's one face, but if I select this and try to move it, you can see it's actually two vertices. Well, there is another feature. If you just select everything with the A key, you can press M again, and this time you can merge by distance. So this way, what it's going to do is it's going to merge the vertices which are really close to each other. So if I click on by distance, you can see right down here it says removed 0 vertices, and that's because these are actually slightly farther apart. However, if I just, again, move myself out of the way here, we have this merge by distance, and I can open this up, and this is right after you use that feature. So there's a merge distance, so I can turn this up, and it's going to have a higher distance value for when it's going to merge. So if I just drag this value up just a little bit, let's just turn up a little bit. Now you can see it says removed 1 vertex. So let's just say maybe I'm doing some modeling or something and I hit Shift D to duplicate, but then just like right click so it stays where it is. You can see now we have just like a duplicated mesh here. So if I just select everything, press M, merge by distance, now you can see it removed 15 vertices because there's these 15 extra vertices which were over on top of the mesh. So this is a very common tool to press M and merge by distance. So what I'm going to do is just delete everything, and then I'll go to the add menu again by hitting Shift A, and I'm going to add a plane, and I'll press period to zoom into the plane. Now another thing which is very important to know about 3D modeling is that each face has an inside of the face and an outside of the face. Now, it might be kind of hard to tell if this one is the inside or this one is the outside because it looks pretty much exactly the same. Well, if I hit Shift A for the add menu, I can add a sphere. So let's just add a UV sphere here, and I'll just drag this over. So you can see there is basically what's called a matte cap. If I click right up here on the viewport shading, you can click here on matte cap, and you can see there are these different matte cap previews. And so this isn't actually going to change the color of your mesh when you render it. It's basically just a viewport preview to see the shape of the mesh. So you can see it's like lighter over here and kind of darker over here. So when you're modeling a scene, generally the matte cap is all going to look the same. So it might be blacker over on one side and lighter on another side, but you can see this sphere here, which I just added, this sphere looks a little bit weird. And I actually just added this sphere and then flipped the direction of the faces to show you this error. Now, one common example of where this might happen is if you're adding a cube here or a plane, and then let's say that I want to go into edit mode, so I'll hit tab and I want to extrude out the plane to give it thickness. So I'll hit E to extrude and I'll just extrude this down. So we basically turned our plane into a cube. But if I just hit Shift A and just add a normal cube here and move this out, you can see there is a weird issue, kind of similar to this sphere here. You can see see it looks really dark right up here on the top using that little matcap viewport preview, but over here, this cube looks white. And so that is because when we extruded out the plane, we extruded it down instead of extruding it up. So if I just add another plane, let's just add another plane here and go into edit mode. If I hit E to extrude it up, you can see it looks good, but if I extrude it down, it looks really weird and dark. So this is one way to kind of tell, to kind of see in the viewport if the faces are the wrong direction, but there is a much easier way which makes it much more clear if you're not quite sure. So in edit mode, what you can do is click on this little button right here, which is the overlays. And you can see there is this face orientation. So if I turn on the face orientation, you don't want to see red because red is the inside of the face. Now, if I go inside any object, you can see it's red inside, and that's correct. So this object is correct because I can just see the normal matcap view, but then inside it's red. The same thing for this. You can see that's red inside because that is the inside of the faces, but then these are the outside of the faces. So you can see if I just like add a plane, you can see if I look on the bottom of the plane and the top of the plane, this is the outside, that's the inside. So this is a clear way to be able to see if the faces need to be recalculated. And so it's called flipping the normals. So you have to flip the normals of the faces. Now you might be wondering why this is even important, because the shape of the cube is still the same. But if you have the normals facing in the wrong direction, and so you're rendering these faces, it can cause shading artifacts and texturing issues. So when you texture your model and light your model and render it, it can cause different issues. And it can sometimes also cause certain issues with modifiers and things. So what I'm gonna do, you don't have to follow me on this, but what I'm gonna do is just flip the normals on these faces here. So you can see now these faces are flipped, but these faces are okay. So what I'm going to do is click on the overlays here, and I can turn off the face orientation. So you can see the shape of the mesh is actually the same, but the shading just looks a little bit weird. You might think this is okay though, but let's say that I want to smooth out this sphere. Well, if I just use the object context menu, like we talked about earlier, and shade smooth, now you can see there's some really glaring issues. So there's really weird kind of shading issues here, and this is definitely going to show up in the render, and it's going to look really weird. So how do you recalculate the normals? Well, if you go into edit mode, you want to select everything by hitting the A key to select everything, and then the shortcut key is Shift N. Shift N, you can remember N for normals, so Shift N is going to flip the normals. So now you can see it looks correct. Let's go back to object mode. We can do the same thing with this object. Let's click on the drop down arrow here on the viewport overlays and turn on face orientation. So I'll hit tab to go to edit mode. You want to press A to select everything. Then you want to press Shift N to flip the normals. Now Blender will try to do the best job that it can, and usually it does a good job, but sometimes it cannot be accurate. So if it's not accurate, then what you want to do is click right behind me, and you can see there is the recalculate normals, and you can manually change it. So after you hit Shift N, you can open up the setting and then click on inside. Or let's say that you just have one face. So let me just select this face. Shift N, I'll flip it. Let's say that you just have one face and maybe Blender didn't do it correctly. You can select that single face, hit Shift N, and then you can manually toggle the inside and outside. So I'll just do the same thing here. Select this object. We'll hit tab to go into edit mode, select everything with the A key and hit Shift N. So this is another very common tool, and you're going to use it all the time when you're doing 3D modeling. And if you're still having a hard time kind of wrapping your head around this, think about like a t-shirt or a sock or some clothing, and you might flip it inside out and you can like see the seams inside of it. Well, that's basically what you're doing. So you need to flip the normals or flipping the sock or the t-shirt so that it's showing the correct faces. Now, occasionally there are some examples where it is okay to see the back faces. So let's say that you're modeling some leaves. Maybe you're having leaves like falling in a scene, like this tutorial here that I created on falling autumn leaves. Well, in that tutorial, I just have a single plane, and then I put a leaf texture on the plane. And so the leaves don't actually have any thickness. Well, in that case, it's okay to see the back faces and the front faces, and the shading doesn't really get messed up. And I don't really want to add thickness to the leaf because it is very thin. So that object is just like a flat plane. It's very thin. So there are some cases where it's okay to see the back faces, but most of the time you do want to avoid it. Let's click here on the drop down and just hide the face orientation. So I'm going to select everything with A, and we'll hit X, and we're going to delete. And I will go to the add menu, and let's add a icosphere. So I'm going to add an icosphere, and then right up here I'm going to turn up the subdivisions so it's pretty high. And then I'll just close the add icosphere settings. So another really useful modeling tool which you're going to use a lot is called proportional editing. So let's go into edit mode, and let's say that I wanted to kind of make this more like a pear shape or an apple shape and just make it like a bit longer up here. Well, what I could do is deselect everything, and I could hit B, and I could like box select this and then let go, and then I could try to move it up, but you can see it's really sharp here because I'd have to like manually pull around all the vertices to make it nice and smooth. So to make this really smooth, like an egg shape or a pear shape, I would need to use what's called proportional editing, because right now I'd have to manually drag around each face. So to turn on proportional editing, you can click on this little circle right up here, or you can press the O key, which is the shortcut key. Now, once you turn on proportional editing, nothing really changes, so it doesn't actually come into effect until you press R or S or G. So grab, rotate, or scale. So I'm going to press G to grab. So now you can see as I'm pulling this up and down, as well as it pulling around your selection, it's also pulling around the vertices which are nearby it, and it's really smooth. So I'm going to hit escape, and then I'm going to press 1 on the numpad to go to front view. So I just have the top selected. What I could actually do is just select a single face, or I could even go to the vertex select and select a single vertex, which is on the top. And I'll press 1 for front view. So I could press G to grab, then I could press Z to bring it up on the Z axis, and then I could pull this up. So it's looking smoother, but let's say I want to make this a bit bigger so it looks like an egg shape. Well, what you can do is scroll your mouse wheel while you're in this mode. So if you scroll your mouse bigger and smaller, that's going to change the size of the proportional editing circle there. And so if the circle is larger, it's going to pull around more of the mesh. If the circle is smaller, it's not going to pull around as much of the mesh. So I'll just drag this up here and maybe click there, then hit G to grab and drag it over like that. So now you can see we basically have like an egg shape or a pear shape. So this is very useful, and you're definitely going to use it all the time when you're 3D modeling. Now, there are a few different options here on the proportional editing. So if you click here, there are some different options. So you can change the fall off. So you can just play around with these. These are kind of fun to play around with. So there's like this root one. So if I drag this up here, it's going to be a little bit sharper. So let me just kind of drag this down. You can kind of see it's a little bit sharper on the edge. You can kind of see how sharp that is. You can also change this to the constant one. And if I change it to constant, you can see it's only going to pull around everything inside the circle, but nothing else. So not too useful, but you might want to use it sometimes. And let's try another one. So there's this random one. So this one is kind of useful if you want to make like a landscape. So maybe you have a flat plane and you've subdivided it and you want to make like a landscape. You could kind of move this around and then it'll add little bumps to the landscape. So that is kind of cool as well. I'll hit Control Z to undo that, but probably the main one that you'll use is like the smooth one. There's also the proportional editing sides, which you can drag up and down, but it's easier just to scroll with your mouse wheel. Now, what I'm going to do is hit A to select everything, and I'll hit Shift D and I'll duplicate our selection. And now if I hit G to grab and try to move this over, you can see it's pulling around the other egg. Well, let's say that I only want to pull around the mesh, which is connected to itself. So if I click up here on the proportional editing, I can click on connected only. So this way, even though both of these objects are both in edit mode, so they're the same object in edit mode, if I hit G to grab, you can see the proportional editing is only going to affect this mesh. So it's not going to affect the other mesh because this mesh isn't connected to this mesh, even though they're both in edit mode. You can see if I turn the connected only off now, it starts to pull everything else around. So I'm going to go back to object mode and I'll hit X and I'll hit delete, and then I'll hit Shift C to center the 3D cursor. Let's add that Suzanne monkey head. So I'll hit Shift A and let's go to mesh and I'm going to add monkey. Now let's say that I want to make Suzanne's ears bigger. So I could go into edit mode by hitting tab. I could just select a vertex here and then I could hit S to scale and maybe scroll with my mouse wheel to make it a bit smaller, the proportional editing, and then hit G to grab and kind of pull it out, and then hit S to scale, maybe even R to rotate, and you can see I can make Suzanne's ear bigger. So I'm just going to scale that up a little bit. But the problem is that Suzanne's ear is bigger on this side, but it's not bigger on the other side. So this is where I'm going to introduce you to an amazing feature with the 3D modeling, which is called modifiers. So you can add different modifiers to objects, and they're basically like little tools which are going to affect your objects. So what we can do is add what's called a mirror modifier, and so that way whatever we do on one side of the mesh, it's going to copy to the other side of the mesh. So to get to the modifier properties, you want to click here on the wrench icon. And then you can click on add modifier, and there's different like options here. So you can do generate. These are like the most common ones which you'll use. There's deforming the object. There's some different things here, but I prefer just to go to the search and then search for the one which I want to add. So I'm going to type mirror, and mirror is one of the most common modifiers. You can see it's called mirror, and it has like a little icon there, sort of like a butterfly, because a mirror is symmetrical. So I'm going to click on mirror. So now you can see that the monkey's larger ear is over here on the other side. And you're going to use the mirror modifier so often because so many things in the real world are symmetrical. So people are symmetrical, cars are symmetrical, and this monkey head is symmetrical because this side is the same as the other side. Now, there is a problem with this. So you can see the ear is larger on the other side, but we also have the smaller ear on this side. And that is because if I hit tab to go to edit mode, we didn't actually delete the other half of the mesh. So it's mirroring this ear over to the other side and then this ear over to the other side. So we kind of have like two monkey heads now because it's mirroring it. So what I'm going to do is click on this little monitor icon, and the monitor icon is going to hide it from our view. So now we can just see the single monkey. So now I want to delete half of it. So what I could do is like click and drag here to like select half of the monkey, and I could hit X and delete vertices, but you can see the back of the monkey head is still selected. So I'll hit Control Z to undo that. So I want to introduce you to another feature which is super common. You're going to use this all the time, and that is wireframe mode. And wireframe mode will allow you to select mesh which is behind other mesh. And so what we'll be able to do is select this side of the monkey, and the back of the monkey is also going to be selected, because right now in solid view we can't actually do that. Well, if you click on this little button right up here, you can see this will switch to wireframe mode. So this is going to allow you to basically see through the mesh. You can see if I click back on this one, the solid one, this is solid view, but then this one is wireframe. Now these two other ones here, this is for previewing materials and previewing the final render, but we're not covering that in this video. So we have solid view to actually see the mesh, and then wireframe to see through the mesh. So now that we're in wireframe view, you can actually select vertices which are behind the mesh. So that is very useful. Now, another thing that I did want to mention, if you are in solid view, but you also want to be able to select things behind the mesh, so to sort of get a best of both worlds where you're in solid view and wireframe at the same time, you can click on this button here, which is toggle X-ray. So this way you can kind of see it's a blend between both of them. So you can kind of see through the mesh and you can select parts behind the mesh, but you can also see the solid view. So that is kind of useful if you want to use that. I generally just use the wireframe view most of the time. So now we can click and drag and select half of the mesh. However, it's a lot easier to select half of the mesh if I hit the 1 on the numpad to go to front view. So this way it'll go into the orthographic perspective, and so it's a lot easier to kind of see the mesh, and so we can do more precise modeling. So I'll hit A to deselect everything, and then I can just click and drag, and I'm going to select half of the mesh. Now I don't want to select over half the mesh, I just want to select this much because I don't want to select the center bits because we don't want to delete that. So I'll just click and drag to select that much right there. So now I want to delete this. So you can hit X or delete. I'm going to hit X, and then we can delete the vertices. So now I can click back here to go to the solid view. Now, because switching between the wireframe and solid is so common, there is of course a shortcut key for it. So if you hold down the Z button, you can see that's going to bring up what's called a pie menu, and you can choose between solid, wireframe, rendered, or material preview. So the rendered and material preview, we're not going to go over those in this tutorial because those are for actually doing materials and rendering, but you can see there is solid and wireframe. So if you drag your mouse over to wireframe and then let go, now we're in wireframe, and let's do this again. So hold down Z, go to solid, let go. So right now you might need to just hold down Z and kind of look at each one and read them, but once you get more familiar with Blender and you get faster, you'll just hold down Z, move over, hold down Z, go back and forth, and it's going to be so quick and you won't even have to think about it. So now you can see we've deleted half of our monkey. So let's now click on that little monitor icon to show the mirror modifier again. And now you can see that we only have this much of the mesh. So if I just select the mesh and hit G to grab, you can see we actually only have this half of the mesh, but it's mirroring it over to the other side. And I can't really edit this side of the mesh because that's the mirror. I can only edit this side. So now if I just like select the monkey head and hit S to scale and make the monkey's ear larger, you can see it's mirroring over to the other side. So now the monkey has like pointy elf ears. So this is so common when you're doing character modeling or modeling vehicles or animals or things like that, because so many things in the real world are symmetrical. Now, I'm not going to cover all of the modifiers in this video because this video is already very long, but I do have a tutorial on modifiers for beginners. So if you want to learn about all the basic modifiers in Blender that you need to know, definitely check out that video, Modifiers for Beginners. The link is in the video description and you can watch it after this video. Now another very common option with the mirror modifier is this clipping option. And what this will do is it's going to merge the vertices which are touching the end of the mirror. And this is so useful because let's say I try to pull this out, maybe I want to like pull around the mesh or something. Well, you can see now there's like a hole here in the monkey's head because it's pulling away from the mirror. Well, if you click on the clipping button and then drag this out, you can see these vertices are basically stuck to the other vertices on the other side of the mirror. And that way you can't actually pull the mirror apart from itself. Now you can also see up here on the axes, there is the x-axis, there's the y-axis, and there's the z-axis. And so you'll use this depending on which direction you want to mirror it by. So in this case, we want to mirror on the x-axis because there is this red line here, which is the x-axis. You can also see here on the gizmo, it's the x-axis. So you'd want to choose x. So what I'm going to do is go back to object mode and let's just bring the monkey head down. Now what I'll do is hit Shift A and I'm going to add a cube. Then I'll hit Tab to go to edit mode, and I'll hit G to grab and drag the cube over. We can also press the O key to turn off proportional editing. I don't need that. And I'm going to drag the cube right up here, so in this corner. Now what I can do is click on Add Modifier. I can go to the search, and I can click on Mirror. And you can see it's mirroring it over on the x-axis on default, but I could also mirror it on the y-axis, and then I could also mirror it on the z-axis. So now you can see we actually have a bunch of cubes. We actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 different cubes because it's mirroring it on this direction, and this direction. So the X, Y, and Z axis. So this could be very useful. For example, if you're modeling like a sci-fi box or something, you could add details to this corner. So let's hit like Control R to add a loop cut, and I'll left click and right click. Let's hit Control R to add another loop cut, left click and right click, and then I could go to the face select, and I could select this face, and I could hit I to inset, and then E to extrude, like that, maybe I to inset and E to extrude. Then I could select this face and I could hit I to inset, E to extrude, something like that. So if you're modeling like a sci-fi box and you want to add some cool sci-fi details, you can see it's going to mirror it over to all of the other sides. Now, let's just say I do want to model a sci-fi box. So let's say I go into edit mode, I select everything, so hit A, and I will hit G to grab and drag this together. So I'm going to stick it together. Well, now let's say that I want to use that clipping option again, just like we did for the monkey head, so it clips it together and so it merges with the mirror. So I could click on the clipping button here, and now when I try to drag this apart, you can see it's going to merge with the mirror. So now we just have this nice sci-fi box. However, there's actually a really big problem with this. It doesn't look like it's a problem right now, but it definitely is a big issue, and it can be a problem when you're doing lighting or shading or rendering or even adding other modifiers. And that is that if you go inside the box, we actually have faces here inside the box, which we actually don't need. And that's because we just added a cube and then stuck the cube together. So if I hit Tab to go to edit mode and then move in here, you can see there is this face here, and this face is basically stuck inside the mirror, and we don't actually want this. So we can actually delete this. So we'll select this face, and we'll hit X and delete faces. We can select this face and hit X and delete faces. Now, another really easy way to kind of do this better is to just hide it again. So you can click on the monitor icon, which is going to hide the mirror, and you can see what we want to do is actually hold down the Shift key and select all of these faces and delete these faces because those faces were inside the mirror and we don't want them. Now what we can do is click on the monitor icon to show it again, and now if I go inside the cube, you can see the cube is nice and hollow inside. Now there are more things that I could talk about with the mirror modifier, but I actually have a mirror modifier for beginners tutorial where I go into more detail. So after watching this tutorial, you can definitely check out that mirror modifier for beginners tutorial with the link in the description. Now you might have noticed that we can't actually edit the other side of the mirror, but let's say that I'm done finished modeling this object and I want to now edit the other side of the mesh because maybe I want to add something different over to this side of the mesh. Well, you can apply the modifiers. So if you click on the drop down arrow on every single modifier, there is the apply button, or if you click on the modifier to select it, you can press Control A with your mouse hovered over the modifier to apply it, or you can just click on the drop down and click on apply. Now when you apply the modifier, you're not actually able to edit the mirror anymore, so make sure you don't apply it until you're finished modeling it. So now if I go into edit mode by hitting tab, you can see I can select this side and I can model this side, so I can like inset the faces, extrude the faces, and do whatever I want to do, but then this side isn't going to be mirrored. So it's definitely very common that you'll apply modifiers, but sometimes you might want to keep the modifier. So I'd say if you don't need to edit the other side of the mesh, just keep the mirror modifier, and that way if for some reason you need to go back and edit the mesh, then you can definitely do that. But if you do need to edit the other side of the mesh and you don't want it to be mirrored, you'll have to apply the mirror modifier. Now there's another common modifier which I want to show you, and that is the Bevel Modifier. So you remember earlier in the video I talked about how you can go into edit mode and select an edge, and you can press Ctrl B to add a bevel. And then you can scroll your mouse wheel to add more cuts to the bevel. I'm going to hit Ctrl Z to undo that. Well, there is actually a modifier which will add bevels to all the edges. So if I click on Add Modifier, I can go to the search, and I can type bevel, and there it is, the bevel modifier. And so if I kind of zoom in here to the edges, you can see it's actually adding a small cut to all of the edges. And I can drag the amount here by changing that amount there on the bevel, and I can also turn up the segment. So if I turn this up maybe to like a 4 or a 5, now you can see it looks very smooth. And then I could also use that shading option that we talked about earlier by using the object context menu and clicking on Shade Smooth. And so now this sci-fi box actually has beveled edges and it looks nice and smooth. Now, if I try to turn this amount really big, you can see eventually the bevel's going to stop. And even if I turn it to a really big number like 10, you can see the bevel isn't getting bigger. Well, that's because the bevel can't get larger than a certain face. So if I just go back to object mode and we'll just use the object context menu and we're just going to shade this flat again, well, you can see right here, it can't actually get larger because then the bevel would like intersect with itself. So if I drag this down, make it really small, let me just turn this down to 0 and then drag the amount up, you can see I can make it bigger, 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 but then eventually it's going to stop right here because it can't go through itself. Now, what's so cool about modifiers is modifiers aren't permanent mesh. So when I gave this a bevel, like let's select this edge, hit Ctrl B to give it a bevel, this is now permanent mesh. Well, if I use the bevel modifier, the mesh isn't permanently created with a bevel, so I could continue to do editing. So I could extrude this out, I could select this face and inset it and bring it back, and it's going to add a bevel to every single edge here. And so that is so useful with modifiers. Modifiers are what's considered non-destructive or like a non-destructive workflow because you can still edit the mesh further and the actual geometry isn't physical geometry. If, however, I wanted to apply it, so click on the drop down and click on apply. Now if I go into edit mode, you can see that it's been applied as actual mesh. So if I selected this face and hit E to extrude now, you can see there isn't a bevel now on this new face because I applied the bevel. So what I'm going to do is just delete this object in object mode. We'll select our monkey head and I'll hit G and Z and drag it up. Now, as well as adding a single modifier, you can actually add multiple modifiers. So you can basically have a stack of modifiers. And I'm not going to go into too many more modifiers. I am just going to cover one more very common modifier in this video, but you can definitely check out my modifiers for beginners tutorial in the description. But I am going to cover the subdivision surface modifier, which is another super common modifier. So let's say that I want to smooth this out and make it nice and round. Well, I could use the object context menu and I could just click on shade smooth. And so it is smooth, but it still looks really rough and kind of sharp on the edges. Well, this is where subsurf comes in. So if I click on add modifier, I can click on the search and I can type in SUB for sub and I can add subdivision surface. So the subdivision surface modifier is going to add more geometry and it's going to smooth it all out. So you can see we have the mirror right up here, but then we have the subsurface down here. So we basically have a modifier stack. So the subsurf modifier is going to add more geometry, but if I hit tab to go into edit mode, you can see we still have a very low poly mesh. So the mesh is low poly, but it's adding more geometry and smoothing out. So if I use the object context menu again and just shade this flat, you can see what it's doing. And if I change the levels viewport here, if I turn this up by clicking on the arrow, you can see it's going to add more and more geometry. And so now you can see the top of the monkey's eyebrow is nice and smooth. So this is a super common modifier. After the mirror modifier, it's probably the most common modifier. And because I haven't applied the subdivision surface modifier, it's non-destructive. So I can go into edit mode and move everything around, but it's still going to be nice and smooth. Now there is the viewport level and there is the render level. And why you might want to have these different is because it can kind of get a little bit laggy in your scene if you have a super detailed mesh, because you can see this mesh is already getting very detailed. It's really high poly. So what you might want to do is take the levels viewport and turn it down to like a 2. And then let's just shade this smooth. But then for the actual render here, you might want to turn this up to maybe like a 3 or a 4 so that it's higher resolution. So if I kind of zoom in here, zoom into the edge, you can kind of see there still are those sharp edges there. But then if you turn this up to 3, it's actually going to render a lot smoother. So you can definitely play around with this. I usually just keep them the same, but if your Blender file is getting kind of laggy, you can turn the viewport levels down so that it's not as high resolution in the viewport, but then it'll actually render with higher resolution when you do a final render. Now I want to explain what the subdivision surface modifier is actually doing, because if I go to the add menu and add a cube, let's just drag the cube over, and then you can use the shortcut key, which is Control 1 or Control 2 on the top of your keyboard. So I'll hit Control 2 and that's going to add the subdivision surface, or you can add it here by adding a modifier. Now you can see when it smoothed out the monkey head, it looks very different from when it's smoothing out the cube. When it smooths out the cube, it kind of is turning it into a sphere. Well, that is because if I go into edit mode, it actually is trying to round out the cube because the cube is so low poly. So what it's doing, if I go to the vertex select, is it's looking at this angle here. So there's like a 90-degree angle from here down to here. And so it's trying to smooth out the vertices in between it. And so because it's trying to smooth out the vertices, it's making it nice and round. So instead of it looking like a cube, it looks like a sphere. Now, why it didn't just turn the monkey head into a big smooth sphere is because the monkey head has a lot more topology. So if I go into edit mode, you can see every single little angle here, it's trying to smooth it out. So like this angle up here to this angle is a lot smaller, so you can see the edge here is more round. Also, if I kind of look here on the monkey's eye, you can see that's kind of round because it's trying to smooth out this angle right here. So that's why on some spots it looks nice and smooth and flat, but over here on a cube, it's really sharp because it's trying to smooth out this angle. So let's say you wanted to add a subdivision surface modifier to a cube, but you don't want it to actually look like a sphere, you still want it to look like a cube. Well, you could add more geometry and then the smoothing area will be smaller. So what I can do is add loop cuts. So we talked about this before, but to add loop cuts, you can press Control R, and then I can just hover my mouse where I want the loop to be, and I'll just click there. And now you can see it already looks sharper, and I can drag this over here, and I don't want to overlap it, so I don't want to drag it all the way over, but I'll drag it maybe to about there and then click to place that. And then again, you can also double tap the G key if you want to go back into the edge slide mode. So now you can see it looks like kind of one of those like gummy candies, but it's rotated over on its side. If I kind of rotate it over, you can see it kind of looks like one of those like gummy candies because it's flat here, but then it's round up here. Well, why is that? Well, that is because now it's trying to smooth this out. So this angle here, but you can see this angle is really sharp or it's really straight. So there isn't actually any angle, but then right over here, down to over here, it's trying to smooth out this. And so it kind of looks around here, but it's kind of sharp on this side. Well, what I could do is add another loop cut. So I'll hit Control R, and this time I'll click down here and drag it up and click right there. Well, now you can see over here on this corner, because there's only one vertex, it looks very round here on this corner, but over here on the opposite corner, you can see this is starting to look much sharper because of the angle here. So I can press Control R to add another loop cut. I can click and drag this over here, and now you can see this cube is really starting to sharpen up. And I can also shade it smooth with the object context menu. So now it looks like a cube, but it's nice and round on the edges because we have more topology. So you can kind of see this angle here is a lot smaller, so it is actually rounding it out, but the roundness is a lot smaller because it's rounding out this vertex to this vertex to this vertex. So this is actually good practice, so let's just continue to do this. So I'm going to hit Control R, click, drag over here, click there, and then Control R, click, drag down, click there, and let's see, we still need to add one more over here, so Control R, click, drag over, and click there. So now you can see if I go back to object mode, we have our cube again, but the cube has nice rounded edges. So that's one way to kind of round out a cube. Another way would be to add the bevel modifier, which I talked about earlier. So if I add a cube, let's drag the cube over. I could click on add modifier. I can go to the search, and you can actually see it's right here because it's a very common one. So I'll add a bevel. And then what I can do is turn up the segments to make it a bit more smooth. So maybe I'll turn up to like a 4. And then I can also drag this amount here to make it bigger and smaller. And then I'll use the object context menu and shade it smooth. So you can see these are two ways to make a cube smooth on the edges by using a subdivision surface or using a bevel. Now, before I wrap up the tutorial, there's just one more thing that I want to cover, and that is that you can join meshes together or separate them. So let's say that I have these two objects, but I want to actually make them one object. Well, if you shift select both of them, you can press Control J. So you can remember J for join, and you can see it joined it together into the other object. And so now because they're the same object, they actually have the mirror modifier. So because I joined the cube into the same monkey head object, it actually now has the mirror. Let's just apply these modifiers by clicking on the drop down, and I can click on apply and then click on the drop down and click on apply. So now if I go into edit mode, you can see this is all one object. Well, let's say now that I want to make the cube a separate object. So I can deselect everything, And then I talked about this earlier, but if you hover your mouse over an object and press the L key, that is going to select the linked vertices or the linked mesh. Now to separate, this is a harder one to remember, but it's the P button. So P for separate. We can't really use S for separate because S is already used for scale. So you press P and then you can click on selection. Now there's also a few other ones here, but let's just first click on selection. And so it's going to make our selection its own object. So I need to go back to object mode, and then you can see this and these are their own objects. So remember, you can select two objects and press Ctrl J to join, or you can select a part of the mesh and hit P, and then you can separate. Now, as well as separating by selection, you can also separate by material. So if you had like a red material and a blue material, maybe on these different objects, and you wanted to break them apart, I'm not going to cover materials in this video, but you can definitely check out my beginner tutorial series to learn how to add materials. But if you had two different materials on different parts of the mesh, you could hit P and you could separate by material. So each material would be its own object. Now, the other one which you can do, if you press P, you can separate by loose parts. And so loose parts is what I was talking about earlier, where this is actually its own separate piece, but then the monkey is its own separate piece. So let me just do that. So I can deselect everything and I can hit P. Let's hit P and I can separate by loose parts. What it's actually going to do now, if I go back to object mode, is make this its own object and this its own object and this its own object. And if I move this out of the way, you can see the monkey's eyes technically are actually separated. So if I take a look at the geometry, the eyes are actually created so they're not a part of the monkey's head. So it actually made the eyes separate objects as well. All right, so with that all wrapped up, this is going to finish it up for my 3D modeling in Blender for beginners tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you were easily able to follow along and understand, and thank you so much for watching. Now, to get a lot better at 3D modeling, I'd highly recommend you watch some follow-along tutorials where you can create some 3D models. And so I have 3 tutorials that I can recommend on my YouTube channel. So I have a rubber duck tutorial where I show you how to 3D model a rubber duck, and I go very slowly and it's made for beginners. I also have a tutorial on stylized pumpkins, so I show you how to 3D model these stylized pumpkins. And again, it's a very easy, beginner-friendly modeling tutorial. And then I also have a tutorial on creating these low poly animals, so I show you how to create these 3 low poly animals, a shark, a dog, and a duck. So if you want to check out any of those videos to practice 3D modeling and learn how to create some things with 3D modeling, then definitely check out those videos. I'll have them linked in the video description. And if you want to learn all of the basic fundamentals of Blender like modeling, lighting, texturing, rendering, and compositing, then definitely check out my Blender for Complete Beginners tutorial series where I show you the entire basics of Blender while creating this snowman character. And if you enjoy my tutorials and you'd like to help support this channel, then you can definitely check out my Gumroad store and Patreon page where you can help support the channel while also getting access to lots of Blender content. So I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.